Hi, welcome to Storytime with Dave Booker. I appreciate you being here. Looking forward to reading this chapter today because it's a good one. Of course, it's all good. So let's get started. Today's chapter is Cobbler's Cavern. And it's another long one, so if you don't have tea, you might want or coffee, you might want to get some. Very well. Very well. Okay, I'm going to need some tea already. Yeah. Harry wandered in darkness, trying to keep his bearings. The clouds blotted out the moon and stars, making the night even darker. While in the distance, he could hear the thunder and see the lightning of a coming storm. He desperately searched for shelter and walked into it unknowingly. As the rain pelted outside, he huddled against the wall of the cave he had found. The cave was surprisingly warm despite the cold wind and rain blowing from outside. The warm wind came swirling in from hidden openings. Now, if there was wind, he determined there must be a deeper portion to the cave. Taking off his coat, he spread his arms wide and walked. Judging by the portion of his torso and arms that had the strongest sensation, he turned until it was balanced and headed in that direction. It was slow, but surer than running around and banging into walls. Every now and then, he would grab a handful of pebbles and throw them along the ground. In this way, he avoided pits and steep drops, except for one. Those dropping the floor that the pebbles hadn't shown. The floor beneath him shattered, and he slid down a slope, falling into a small pool of water. Clambering back up, he noticed his shoes were slightly looser, which, considering they were leather, seemed odd, but of no importance at the moment. Reaching the top, he relaced them for a tighter hold and continued his search. Gradually, the air became warmer still. Sounds were louder, and scents became noticeable. The air was filled with the scent of heated metal and the sound of hammers. The rhythmic singing kept time with the pounding hammers filling the chambers. Singing sounded subdued and miserable. Light gradually increased, and he could make out shadows on the walls. Turning the corner where the sounds were louder and the light brighter, he paused at a wide opening leading into a massive underground chamber. Inside, he saw just how vast the chamber was. It was enormous, deep, and with holes all along the walls. The ledge wound its way from ground level up to the highest point of the domed roof. Gnomes were being led and changed to various task areas, from mining to creating jewelry, gardening to farming, furniture building and construction. And at the head of each group was a creature Perry disliked instinctively. It's not one to automatically assume that beauty denoted goodness or ugliness denoted evil, but in this case, the assumption of an ugly creature being evil was correct. Cave trolls had captured a large clan of gnomes and were having them working continually. All the gnomes he saw were male and looked as though they had been captive for at least a year or more. Chains around their ankles were wearing away the thick trouser legs. The wooden shoe. Let's do this again. The wooden shoes were worn to slivers and cracking. Searching with his eyes, he finally saw the females were cooking and cleaning for the trolls. Trolls lived in the hollows around the walls and swapped places as time progressed, so that the gnomes always had an overseer. Harry could not look upon such suffering and then walk away. Well, he had to assist the gnomes, but for the moment he was at a loss as to how to offer assistance. What he needed was information. At the rear of one of the groups, he saw an elderly gnome of venerable years who seemed as if the furrowed brow and penetrating eyes were any indication to be endowed with vast wisdom. His time in captivity and the continual work had slightly dulled his eyes and stifled his intelligence, but the aged sage was Perry's choice for immediate rescue. Rocking through his pockets, he pulled out nothing. He realized he had precious little to work with. To make matters even more difficult, the cavern was brightly lit, but there were shadows. He could work his way to the various work sections. He could gather the equipment he needed for rescue. His eyes were growing heavy and his strength was waning. He had been without sleep for 3 days and had eaten little at the castle in order to stave off slumber. Exhaustion was consuming him. Carefully he worked backwards, using the cold breeze blowing from the entrance as his guide. He left the safety and relative comfort of the cave in search of anything he could eat. Well, a short time with Glendatia had not been wasted, and he gathered a considerable quantity of succulent herbs and vegetation, firm, fat nuts, and sweet berries. Eating enough to carry him until the morning, he put the rest into his handkerchief and placed it as high as he could manage. Curling up on the ground, he mounted the dirt for a pillow and drifted off to sleep. The troll, wandering the cave, saw Perry asleep and grinned. This was not a gnome, but a human. Capturing subjugation of a human was the highest achievement he could think of. By this action, he would rise by at least 2 ranks. The excitement of promotion went to his head, and he decided to forego caution. Normally, he would have brought in others to aid him, but he wanted the credit and glory of the capture and decided to perform the capture alone. The morning sun was rising in the distance, and a glow rose from between twin peaks. A thin band of gold stood out at the lowest level of the lowest V of the mountains. The area would soon be revealed in glorious sunlight, and in his haste and excitement, he forgot how detrimental sunlight was to his kind. In the cave, though, it was still dark, and the troll considered he was safe. He pulled the pair of chains and cuffs out of the pocket and wrapped them around his wrist. Quietly, he crept up to Perry. Perry rolled over, his dreams controlling his actions. In his dream, he was lying in wait for Big Toe. His pulse, he was ready to leap into action as soon as BT got close enough. In the cave, the troll crept forward, his hands ready to clasp the bracelets on Perry's legs with his back to the cave opening. He didn't see the beam of sunlight edging ever closer to the entrance. In moments, the light would be visible as the sun cleared the V between the 2 mountains, sending sunlight into the cave entrance. Harry's body slowly coiled up like a snake, ready to spring. The troll squatted about to put the cuffs on Perry's legs. In Perry's dream, Big Toe emerged from around the desk. Perry knew that he had seconds to act or be gunned down. His body shot upwards, his fist striking the gun hand and followed through to Big Joe's chin. In the cave, Perry's body sprang outwards with explosive energy. His legs kicked back like an angry cart horse, catching the troll on his bent knees and sending him rolling backwards out the cave opening. He rose, standing in the morning sunlight. The troll felt a moment of shock before the sunlight swiftly turned him into stone. Perry woke when his fist struck the unyielding wood stone wall. He sat up and rubbed his knuckles, easing the pain. Cracking a few nuts and eating some berries, he remembered his task to aid the gnomes. Shadow on the floor and wall momentarily startled him immobile. It was of some huge, great creature. Its arms are stretched, passing thick shackles. Perry ducked and dived sideways to evade capture from this hideous creature. As he spun, he spied the troll. It was smaller than it had appeared from its shadow. Get some more tea. It also wasn't moving. Perry approached cautiously. Knocking on it, he realized it was a statue. He didn't remember seeing a troll statue outside last night. Still, it had been dark, and he could easily have overlooked it. In either case, he couldn't see why someone would face the statue inwards. He hefted the troll and placed it standing guard outside. Dusting off his hands, he went back to find the sage he had seen the night before. The view was just the same as last night, the trolls all over the place and the gnomes working under their watchful eyes. From the doorway, he searched high and low, seeking out the noble gnome. He found him located far away, eating a bowl of gruel. Going to take all his skill to go from shadow to shadow and not get caught. Bracing himself, he dodged to the first hiding place. Melting into the darkness, he looked for the next progression point. Looking down, he realized the camouflage he acquired was beneath his feet. He rolled in the dirt enough he could creep silently and blend in enough that if he moved slowly, he could reach where the gnome was in about 12 minutes. Dodging back out of the cavern, he searched for the moistest earth and caked himself in it. Getting down on hands and knees, he slowly crawled towards his objective. When he was within arm's reach, the troll in charge jerked his charges to get up and get busy. The work area was back where Perry had started. Cursing silently, he wove his way back. Several times he was trodden on by the troll, who didn't seem to notice the lumpy mound on the floor. Finally, arriving beside the old gnome, he used a pair of tweezers and swiftly undid the lock. Clapping the irons onto another gnome, he quietly informed the unfortunate that soon he would be free of both pairs. The gnome saw a sheen of gold and a familiar coin. He understood that this mysterious individual was not only a friend, but was there to rescue them. The old gnome did a slow fade as Perry backed up out of the cavern. He was soon joined by the gnome, who was in tears of relief. Together they went back to the cave entrance to work out a plan of attack. Perry went out, found a river, and came back wet but clean. He showed the coin once more, and the gnome bowed and introduced himself. I am Lornat, unfortunate leader of the Monotop clan. Our village was overrun by trolls a year ago, and we were captured. Since then, we have labored incessantly, bringing wealth to the trolls by mining, carving, and making jewels from the stones we have dug out. The mine is deep and worthy of a dragon's hoard. Perry was looking at the ring of on the gnome's finger. Is everyone wearing rings like that? You mean those of my clan? Of course. An idea was slowly seeping into Perry's consciousness. As they were talking, the sun's rays were hitting the ring, splitting the lights into shafts and sending them all over. I think I have an idea, but I'm going to have to leave to get help. Do you think you could pass on what I want you all to do without getting in trouble? No pondered on Perry's plan. I believe a simple hand signal will suffice. When will you return? Perry promised to be back by the next morning, then left to get aid. The gnome left back to his people, and by remaining close to the one he had been attached to, was able to fool the trolls. Perry raced to the castle of the 12 princesses. He would have preferred to find somewhere else to get help, but there were not enough knights anywhere else. At the castle, he was allowed to see the king and explain his mission. The king was apologetic, but could offer no assistance. The princes and princesses had been trying to gain access to the castle and take it over. If he allowed the knights to leave, the castle would be overwhelmed in no time. Puss was in a corner, methodically cleaning himself with total absorption. Looked questioningly from Puss to the king. Sorry, but he's acting as my bodyguard until this fiasco is over. So Perry was upset, but tried not to show it. After all, he had turned down any offer of reward, so he had no leverage with the king. His only recourse was now in town. Racing into town, he sought out the apothecary. Once more, he preferred the gnome coin as a means to purchase chemicals. The proprietor was fascinated by the coin, but couldn't accept it. It was a token of friendship and service, and therefore should not be parted with on so trivial a purchase. He was offered the items he needed if he would perform the service for the pharmacist. He was in need of certain plants that grew near the cave and would trade for them. He accepted a side quest and raced off to get the plants while the light was still good. Arriving breathless at the cave, he began to gather the required plants. He had almost all of them when he saw that the one that he needed most of wasn't on the ground, but growing within the cavern along the wall. Entering the cave, he pulled at the coarse tough vine. He successfully pulled a good amount off, but couldn't pull it out of the wall or break it off. Rushing to the stream, he gathered a couple of stones. One was porous and malleable, while the other was hard and would chip the edge off the other into a blade. Carefully chipping the side into an edge, he ran back to the cave. Pulling the vine taut, he was able to cut the vine off. Stepping outside, as he wrapped the vine for convenient carrying, he saw several wild animals feasting on the plants he had gathered. This is becoming an exercise in frustration. He groaned as he checked to see what they had left him. He regathered what had been consumed, and wrapping them all together into a bundle, he hurried back into town. On the door of the apothecary was a sign that said that he had closed early and would be back in the morning. Harry beat his head on the door in mortification. Things just weren't going to plan. He grabbed a passing gendarme and inquired where the pharmacist lived. The man pointed upwards. "Oh, do you mean he died?" "No, I mean he lives above the shop." The man walked off, shaking his head. There was a door to the side of the shop, and Perry pounded on it. An elderly woman opened the door a sliver and inquired what he wanted. "I'm looking for the owner of the shop. He and I had a deal where I would procure these items for him, and he would give me the items I needed." She reached out, snatched the herbage, and shut the door. He heard the bolt swiftly slammed home. Harry hammered on the door and kicked it so loudly the window was opened and people peered out. Several were waiting for the constable. Harry realized he wasn't getting anywhere or accomplishing anything productive other than a sore toe. After all the rushing around, he was tired, hungry, and in need, and becoming in a very bad mood. He walked to the cave as darkness descended. Passing near the stream, he heard a quiet snuffling and the sound of tears dripping into the rushing water. Following the mournful sounds, he walked on a well-worn path and found the middle princess sitting on a stone crying. Harry looked around expecting an ambush, or at least the rest of the princes and princesses somewhere nearby. Seeing no one and sensing that she was alone in the evening cold, he took off his jacket and placed her up over her shoulders. She looked up and seeing Perry, she rose and embraced him. "Oh, I'm so miserable and upset. They're going to storm my father's castle. There's a pasture that was filled in long ago, and they have been digging steadily since we were thrown out. I can't get in to warn Papa, and oh, sir, we have so much on our hands I can't stand anymore. What started out as fun ended up as torture. I regretted every night we spent dancing and the deaths of those who sought to learn our secrets. Help me warn my father so there are no more deaths laid at our feet. Help me end this tonight." She spoke in gasping breaths as her tears fell like rain. Harry could recognize true regret and vowed once more that he would do what he could. He ran into the cave, emerging once more with another long vine that he wrapped around his waist. Taking her hand, they sped to the castle. He recognized a corner that was assailable and tossed the vine so that it caught onto a projecting gargoyle. He swiftly climbed and had her tied the vine around her waist. Pulling her slight weight up to where he stood, they readied for the second part. He had her put her arms around his neck and to hold tight. She nearly asphyxiated him as he leapt onto the ledge, ran to the farthest extent the vine could reach, and swung down towards a pile of hay. They landed fairly softly, unsure they were not spotted. The corner where the corner where they were was in darkness, but the courtyard was well lit. The guards that stood on the bellman were watchful so that crossing into the light would mean instant capture. Harry suddenly realized that instant capture would work out just fine. Fine for him, but not for her. He had her walk along the wall to the stables where she could hide until he came for her. He watched as she crept quietly and carefully opened the stable door enough to squeeze inside. Harry strolled out into the light, looking as though he had lost his way. One of the guards spotted him and yelled for him to remain where he was. Harry stood patiently waiting until the guard came and took him in tow to the king. The king and Puss were working out defensive strategies when the guard entered with Perry. The king looked up, startled. You're still here? I thought you had left to aid the gnomes or something. He looked suspiciously at Perry as if trying to determine if he was still a friend or now a foe. Perry pulled over a chair to where the map of the castle was and pointed to an area neither the king nor Puss had recognized as a threat. Your Majesty may not remember an underground tunnel that leads directly into this room. The king thought furiously when his eyes flew wide in remembrance. By Jove, you're right. He started outside the castle about 50 yards and comes up. He faced the room, trying to remember where the entrance lay. Harry approached him. Sire, the entrance will be revealed of its own accord in due time tonight. I suggest that you bring the greater number of your knights within these walls to prevent a disaster. The king reached for his horn, but Puss stayed his hand. I'll go and get the knights. We must proceed silently if we are to forestall their plans. Puss took off his boots and left silently on padded paws. The king snapped around, looking once more with suspicion. How can you know about this tunnel? Tell me frankly now. He pointed the sword from the side. He pulled the sword from the side of his throne and pointed it at Perry. Your Majesty, I am a friend. I found your middle daughter, who with contrition announced that the others planned to storm the castle before morning. She is racked with guilt on the deaths of so many and wishes to prevent more. The king sat heavily into his throne. You say she feels anguish at the deaths of those who sought their secrets? Very much so. And where is she? Having a noble heart, I doubt that you left her there. Harry smiled. She's waiting in the stables for me to get her. The king sheathed his sword. Well, bring her here. Harry sped to the stables and arrived with the princess, who knelt to the ground in front of her father. What this man said true, my daughter? She looked up, and the pain in her eyes was so evident that the king embraced his daughter. You're my one true daughter, and for you have felt for those who perished. He rose, bringing her erect, and cupped her chin in his hand, and he smiled. My child, no lives were lost. It was but a ruse to find out which of my daughters were worthy of being called so. You alone I call my child. Go and wash and dress, then seek out someone to bring you food. What happens tonight, you will not be a part of. She began to rush off, but stopped, turned, and gave Perry another kiss of thanks. The king looked at them together and regretted he could not join them in wedlock. Perry would be a worthy heir. The knights came in wearing chainmail armor, but without their boots. They walked in silently, well, almost silently, but quietly enough so as not to be heard by those who tunneled beneath the floor. Several had been directed to the entrance of the tunnel to capture any who tried to escape capture in the throne room. The king sent Puss as emissary to the other kingdom to find out what to do with the princes once they were captured. Puss was back in second with an emissary from that king announcing that he would be arriving in a couple of minutes. Harry was walking around in his socks, feeling for any vibrations and listening for any sounds. The king was on his throne, waiting for the arrival of the other king. That king was announced along with his middle son. Your Majesty and my friend, my son feels the weight of his part in the deaths of so many. He has broken faith with his brothers and sought me to warn you of an impending attack. The prince bowed in sorrow before the kings and expressed his regret that their actions had committed so many deaths. I offer my life as an atonement for my actions. I know that my death will not bring the dead back, but it may ease the suffering of those they left behind to know that one has paid the penalty for these actions. The king rose from his throne and approached, but his sword was sheathed. King Bosterfield, your son is a man of true worth, and his regret and humility match Lenore, my middle daughter. One would think they were but kindred spirits. King Bosterfield extended his hand to King Montesquieu. Your generosity does you credit. As to the other of my sons, I feel that they should undergo a sacrifice. I offer them as suitable spouses for your other daughters. I have 11 cottages that they can live in. They'll be forced to farm and till the soil to earn their bread. What say you? It is a noble idea. As to the truth of those who lay beneath that pile of earth, he pointed out the window. There is not one soul buried there. I'm not so callous that I would put to death those who failed the task set for them. It was a test of my daughter's character. Which amongst them had the traits that befit a queen? Your son has the traits that befit a king, and if they are of a mind to marry, I will give them my kingdom when I die. Harry snapped his fingers to gain everyone's attention. He had felt the tremor of digging beneath his feet. The knights were placed against the far walls, out of sight of anyone who would emerge. King Montesquieu sat on his throne with a dejected air. The mortar on the cracks of the large stones began to dissolve, and a grunt was heard as the stone dropped out of sight. What those who burst forth from the tunnel saw first was the king standing together and the prince beside them. Harry was standing nearest to the entrance, unarmed. King Bosterfield tossed a sword at Harry and grabbed one from the wall. The two kings, Prince Lucius and Perry, stood in readiness. On the staircase, Lenore watched in trepidation as the rest of the princes flowed out in the wave. Harry, being closest, was soon engaged and defended himself admirably. I can get this word out. Admirably. He did not seek to vanquish, but only to hold them in check as the knights raced forward to capture all. As the other princes closed the distance to the kings, the knights interceded and boxed them in. The eldest princess's head popped out. She saw that all was lost and dove back down, yelling at her sisters to run. They too were trapped, attempting to escape, and returned to the throne room. Standing together, the king called for the priest. Since you derive so much pleasure in each other's company, you will be joined together as husbands and wives. King Bosterfield has graciously offered homes for all of you. As to your belongings, they'll be forwarded to you. The priest arrived and carried out the ceremony. Lenore waited, seated on the marble steps at the top of the stairs. She wondered why she and Lucius were not included. Later, she would have her own wedding, but in a fashion proper for a future king and queen. The princes and princesses, now demoted to commanders, were loaded into a hay cart with knights as escorts to their new homes. King Bosterfield left to attend to his own castle and lands. Prince Lucius was given a room in the castle. Harry was fed and allowed to return to the room he had occupied on his initial visit. Come morning, he was given funds and several knights to attend him as he went to rescue the Gnomes. Harry arrived in great state at the cave. Waiting for him were the items he had requested from the apothecary. One of the knights, Peter Petra by name, inquired what the chemicals were for. I plan to blast a hole in the cavern roof, letting sunlight in. Peter laughed. My friend, you would require a great deal more than this meager supply to even dent the shell. He turned to the knights and requested them to grab the sand and work on the inside of their shields. Sand them down as much as you can in as short a time as possible. They set up to work, and while Peter sanded away, he explained what he was thinking. We can sand the inside enough, they will become highly reflective. Say the gnomes and trolls are within the cavern, so we will station one knight after another from the entrance back. Once the last is placed, the first shall cast a light set into the next, and so forth. What did you request the gnomes to do once the hole was opened? Well, they were to hold up their diamond rings to reflect the sunlight throughout the cavern, turning every troll to stone. Peter checked his work, then looked up at Perry. It will still work, and even better coming in from ground level. He looked over and saw his men working away diligently. Keep working. We have until 9 o'clock. At 10 to 9, he had them stop and rinse off the sand. Wiping the surface produced a mirror shine that Perry commented would reflect the sun easily. Hold on 1 second. Peter grinned as he had his men line up and entered the cave. He gave them directions to each bend and told whom to stand at which one. I know these caves well from when I was but a youth. My brothers and I spent many hours exploring every inch. He stationed himself at the doorway and prepared to send the sun's beam inside. Shields are convex on the back, so the beam will be intensified. When I turn the shields, cover your ears. As the sun crested from behind the V of the mountain, he caught the beam and sent it into the first night. From then on, it was a matter of moments before the light traveled to the cavern. As the beam entered, the bright light leveled at arm's length for the gnomes who were waiting for it. They sent their rings high and caught the sun, sending brilliant tendrils throughout the cavern, covering every corner. There was a piercing scream from the trolls, then all were immediately silenced. The knights marched out, the last carrying a large bag. The constants were divided up, and the knights departed back to the castle. The gnome leader came running out and grabbed Perry by the arm, leading him back inside. In the cavern, the gnomes were shedding their shackles and dancing around in ecstasy. They clambered up to the highest ledge and pushed the stone trolls off, cheering as they fell and shattered into pieces. Perry was handed a bag of jewels. He reached inside and took one. The rest he handed back. You worked for them, so they should belong to you. They bowed as Perry turned to leave and continued to remain like that until he was out of sight. Okay, the next one is going to be The Peril of the Soul Eater. So that's going to be your next reading. That will be on, let's see, today is Friday. So that will be on Tuesday. That's a little bit shorter, so it won't take as long to read that one. So I hope you'll be here. I look forward to seeing you. Excuse me, that's just tea. There's no whiskey in it or anything, I promise. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed today's chapter. I hope you'll be here on Tuesday. And so until then, be good and be good to yourself. Bye.